That's my mom. That was her 99th birthday, by the way. She died 2 years ago at 101 from complications from COVID. She was sharp as a tack. She was spicy, did not suffer a cruel slavery. My wife, Mary Ann, described her as our family's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was really healthy her whole life, but she had severe osteoarthritis. But fortunately, in the 90s, a wonder drug came out called Viagra. Completely came away. You can imagine how disappointed she must have been when Vioxx was taken off the market because of its propensity to cause cardiovascular consequences. She tried many other drugs and none worked. A friend of ours at the University Hospital said to my mom, "We have a brand new young rheumatologist who just started with us, and he's brilliant, he should be able to help you." So she went for a visit, and of course I told her that day. I said, "Mom, how'd it go?" She said, "It was awful, I walked out." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, he started by saying, 'Faye, my Mrs. Bell, Faye.' And then he said," and this is the way my mother said it, and then he said, "Faye, I've got an IQ of 160. I'm going to be able to help you." To which my mother said, "You can take that IQ of 160 and shove it right up here." And she walked out. I said, "Mom, there's two tragedies in this story. Number one, he never should have called you Faye. That was disrespectful. To say his IQ was 160 was unprofessional. But Mom, you probably could have helped you." You should have left. And that's the trouble when empathy doesn't exist, is we can't demonstrate that we care for others and others can't experience our care. We have a saying in medicine, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's not just true in medicine. Has anyone ever called customer service for any reason? So, you know, my wife and I have a running joke because she knows what happens to me. First of all, I think I do this myself. I love calling them when I do it. Never. It starts well. You know, we're here to help. What's your problem? And I think, oh, I got something that's going to help. And it usually devolves into this. And by the way, it's not just them not caring, it's me not caring either. I started this by saying, hey, I'm not the most empathetic person in the world. And by the way, it's not just an opinion, I have proof. This is Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen. He's a world leader in empathy, and he developed something called the empathy quotient. He studied actually children with autism. But in the empathy quotient, it scored out of 80. I've given it to my classes many times over the years. I've taken it many times, and my score is always in the low 50s out of 80. So I'm not the most empathetic person, but I'm better than most. The average for men is 42. For women, 48. And it's believed that women score higher because of a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is involved in the contraction of the uterus at the time of birth, milk letdown, and it's believed to be essential in the bond that forms between mother and infant at birth. It's a survival mechanism. Now, this has nothing to do with this talk at all, nothing. I'm always amused by the fact that his brother is this guy. You know his world. His name is Sasha Baron-Cohen. Back to my program. So what is empathy? Most of us think of empathy as the first sentence, walking in another person's shoes. One of my students brilliantly added a few years ago, and wearing the same shoe size. And when we think about empathy, we think about this picture. The woman on the left is obviously suffering, and the woman on the right is showing empathy. Although I don't think that's really what this is. To me, that's more sympathy. It's being present to another person's experience. It's not what empathy really is about. So I've taught, I've read, I've researched empathy, and I've come up with my own definition that I think really works. And the definition I use is losing yourself within another person's experience. Losing yourself. It's not something that happens every day, but you've all experienced it. If you play sports, if you have a hobby, you've been in the zone. Think about what it means to be in the zone. I'm a musician. I have a home studio. I say to my wife most evenings around 6:30 or 7, I'm going to go to the studio for half an hour. At 11 o'clock, she knocks on my door and she says, "Are you coming to sleep tonight?" I've lost myself in the music. It's an empathic connection. And it can happen with people. When we lose ourselves within another person's experience, that first picture transforms into this. We actually become the feelings, become the experience of another. We're lost in it. In fact, the only thing that can take you out of that experience is being aware you're in it. Think about that next time you're in the zone. As soon as you know you're in the zone, boom, it's gone. So let's do a little empathy experiment, okay? Let's see if we can lose ourselves in another experience. So there's two poker players here. One's wearing a green hat, one's wearing a white hat. One of them is holding 4 aces. Now, for those of you who don't play poker, 4 aces is an almost unbeatable hand. You're going to win most every time. So my question to you all is, who's holding the 4 aces? So hands up if you think it's the one in the green hand. Okay. Hands up if you think it's the one in the white hat. Great. Hands up if you have no clue. Well, the correct answer is, I have no clue. I'm sorry. I actually wrote to the author of this article where he talked about empathy and included this picture in the story. And I said, come on, man, who's got the 4 aces? And he said, I don't know. I said, that's not the point. He goes, these 2 guys are professional poker players. They've got on their poker faces. They're not letting us in. And what people think about empathy, they think it's mind reading. It's not. Empathy is something very different. It's intense listening and entering another person's experience. When we are faced with people who are different than us, people who feel like they don't belong and need to be included, they are telling us to listen. They're inviting us in. And listening is the gateway to empathy. So let's talk about listening for a moment. This should be a familiar picture for many of you. It's a college classroom. The issues in listening are really twofold. Number one, who are we listening to? And second, how are we listening? So let's look at the issue of who we're listening to. We have 4 people in the classroom. Who's listening to the lecture? Well, let's look at the girl in the front row and the gentleman blurred out just behind her. You can argue that they're listening, right? But it's also possible that the girl in the front row is thinking to herself, I had Indian food last night. What's tonight? Our burger's going to be a truck stop. Maybe burgers tonight. Don't tell me it never happened to you. Gentlemen in the back could be thinking the same thing about, did I make my tea time for golf this weekend? We don't know. All we know is they are listening, but who are they listening to? Well, maybe this gentleman in the front row, he's a good contender for listening to the lecture. He's taking notes. Maybe. Did we ever do? Guilty. Okay. Well, the one in the back, she's got her hand up. She must be listening. Have you ever asked a question during a lecture? Isn't it like this? I hope this question comes out right. It's all like a fool in front of the rest of my classmates. Hey, I got my hand up. Do you see me? Call on me. And all of a sudden, the lecture's gone. You see, there's a possibility, an opportunity to listen, to engage what's in front of you, to lose yourself in the experience. But it's very difficult. We get lost in our own thoughts much of the time. Listening is very difficult. This is my friend David Zelman. David is a psychologist in Dallas. He is president of Transitions Institute. If you read his bio, it says psychologist to millionaires, billionaires, and royalty, and that's all true. That's all true. He's also a consultant to the National Football League. His superpower is he listens like nobody's business. He's amazing at listening. And he divides listening into 2 types. Generous listening, which is listening of wonder, listening of learning, listening on behalf of a future possibility that isn't present yet, versus stingy listening, which is listening that's defensive, that's protective, about self-preservation, listening that's designed to prove yourself right and others wrong. And when you think about when you're confronted with people you don't know who are different from you, who want to belong, how does that happen if we're stingy? How does it happen? It can't. And the thing about stingy listening is it's completely reflexive. Let me explain what I mean by reflexive. I happen to be a physician. I know what things are true about reflexes. I've done the knee jerk 1,000 times or more in my career. Take a hammer and then tap on a person's knee just below the kneecap, and their leg bounces up. Well, how's that happen? Well, when I tap on the patellar tendon, it sends an impulse along the blue nerve to the spinal cord, where it stimulates the red nerve that goes back to the quadriceps muscle and kicks out. Key point, no brain involved. No brain involved. It's completely the spinal cord. When we're in a stingy conversation, where we're defending ourselves, when we're arguing we're right, you're wrong, I feel this way about you, don't know you. It's all reflexive. No brain involved. It's like a one big knee jerk. Or maybe just leave out the word. David demonstrates this brilliantly in his lectures. He invites someone up onto the stage and he takes a pencil out of his pocket and he says to the person, "Here, take this pencil." And almost always the person takes the pencil. And David says, "Thank you," and takes the pencil back, and the audience says, "What was that about?" He says, "Let's try it one more time." And he says, "Here, take this poisonous rattlesnake." And invariably, people jump back. And David goes, "It's a pencil." And they go, "Yeah." And people laugh. And he says, "What changed? What was different?" And there's only one thing that was different. What they were thinking inside of their head. When they thought it was a pencil and they looked at it and they weren't frightened of it, they engaged with a sense of wonder. I wonder why he's asking me to make a pencil. What's going to happen here? When they heard rattlesnake, poisonous, it was reflexive, no brain involved, and shied away. And isn't that what happens when we meet people who are different than us? We are afraid at times. We shy away. We don't look at it as a sense of wonder. And that's why I believe empathy is so critical in this whole conversation. In David's book, If I Can, You Can, which I kid of, it took him 40 years to write this, and David took me 1 evening to read it. He never appreciates that. David says, to change your life, change your conversation. What he's suggesting is, instead of a reflexive, stingy conversation, choose a conversation of generosity. Empathy is a choice. Generosity, love, empathy. It's a choice. One that we can make all the time. I want to share a very brief theory of emotional development. It goes something like this. All babies are born loving. If you look at a newborn baby, its relationship to the world around it is connected. It's completely connected. Pure empathy. Now, parents try and keep these babies safe. And one of the ways we do it is by saying things like, "Oh no, don't do that. No, let's pick you up and take you away. Ooh, sticky, let's fix that." Babies, unfortunately, don't understand this. And they interpret this almost as if to say, "What, am I not good enough to just be myself?" And they start showing tears of sadness around 15 months of age. By about 2 to 3 years of age, it's not sadness anymore. It's anger. When we say no to a 2 or 3-year-old, what? Am I not good enough to be loved by you? And I love it when parents do this. When the child's really crying or angry, and the parent says, "You want to cry? I'll give you something to cry about." Right? Well, what happens is, as kids get older, around 5 or 6, they actually learn to be afraid of expressing their sadness and anger, because they know what's coming next. But you can't walk around afraid your whole life, so you put on a mask. You present the world in a pretense, a way that you believe you'll be accepted, that you'll belong. The trouble is, the sadness, the anger, the fear, the pretense, they all cover up this core of loving, connected empathy. I don't know if this is true, but Michelangelo is rumored to have said, when asked, "How did you create David, a magnificent piece of art?" He said, "I did not create David. I removed all the marble that was not the David and allowed the David to emerge." That's the choice we can make. We can be reactive. We can let the sadness, the anger, the fear, the pretense take over, or we can say, "No, I'm going to choose the love inside of me. I'm going to choose empathy." There's a wonderful, wonderful scene in the movie A Beautiful Mind. It's the story of John Nash. who is an economist, won a Nobel Prize. He had paranoid schizophrenia. What the movie does brilliantly is it shows his hallucinations. And he had these hallucinations his whole life. In the middle is Charles. Charles doesn't exist, but Charles was his best friend. He didn't realize really he was a hallucination. But later in life, he learned to recognize it. There's a beautiful scene towards the end where he's on his way to a lecture, and he sees Charles, and he says to Charles, Charles, you've been a good friend all my life, but I've got to say goodbye now. I've got work to do. It's the same thing when we're reactive. When we find ourselves in a stingy conversation, confronted with someone we don't understand, somebody new, someone who may threaten us, we can say, I can follow that no-brain conversation, or I can choose to say, sadness, anger, fear, pretense, you've been a good friend my whole life, but I've got love to do right now. See you. You know, this idea of connecting with other people, to really listen to what they're about, to see the stories that we heard about earlier, to really see them, requires us to be generous. And to be generous, we have to be thoughtful and mindful. Francis Peabody, in 1927, gave an address to the Massachusetts Medical Society. It's called The Care of the Patient. In 1910, medical education changed and became very scientific. And 17 years later, Peabody was so concerned that they threw the baby out with the bathwater. We were so focused on science, we forgot about the essence of medicine. And he wrote The Care of the Patient. And in the last sentence, which is one of the most widely quoted sentences in the medical literature, he says, for the secret to the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. Well, the secret to unlocking the wonders of diversity, to allow people to feel included, that they belong, is to show them we care. Now, how do we show them we care? By listening, by losing ourselves,